găsit! Ne aflăm în fața aulei din cadrul Facultății de Științe Economice și Gestiune Afacerilor, unde se găzduiește Free Market Roadshow, atenție, pentru prima dată în Cluj-Napoca. Conferința reunește personalități importante din domeniul politicilor monetare, fiscale, de investiții și de antreprenoriat. Printre invitații de azi se numără Barbara Kolm, vicepreședinta Băncii Naționale a Austriei și director al Centrului Economic din Austria, precum și Dan Mitchell, economist și publicist, unul dintre cei mai importanți experți din Statele Unite în privința cotei unice, precum și alți invitați importanți din Colorado, Oklahoma și Guatemala, reprezentanți ai unor entități-cheie.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, because he was an opportunist. He saw that as a way of expanding political power. Hayek anticipated this. He said, whenever you have an emergency declared by the state, that's when you need to worry about your liberty, because someone's going to try to take it away. From the beginning of March 2020, I was challenging the dominant narrative, was what? Impose lockdowns, create a general masking rule, mandate, vaccine mandates, that they work, they're safe and effective, and everyone must be protected. Now, on the other hand, lockdowns are not needed. Now, what we found before March 2020, this was the received wisdom among scientists and medical professionals. If you look back, they said lockdowns are not needed. That was never even thought about before until the Chinese imposed the lockdowns and people began imitating them because they believed that the Chinese were succeeding. Masks don't work. This was the received wisdom. As a general strategy, masks don't work. For individuals in a confined area, maybe, but as a general policy, they don't work. What we find is that the vaccines, looking historically, whether we look at swine flu vaccine, we found that very often the promotion of vaccines for the general public didn't work. So what we had was this massive division that came about where people resisted. They began to say, well, look, there's something going on here. So what happened is, under the dominant narrative, which was imposed upon us, is that protecting a collective, and collectives are these arbitrary conceptualizations. Humanity is reality. Collectives don't bleed. Humans bleed. So if we begin to believe that we're protecting this sort of abstract concept of reality, we're missing the human aspects of those policies. So what we found is that if you have submissive citizens, this is what allows people to fight wars on behalf of governments. Because most individuals don't fight wars because of themselves. Maybe in distant history they might have, but now people are conscripted in the military and so on. So gulags, all kinds of genocide occurred on the basis of these ideas of collectives rather than focusing on the individual. When people say, because of COVID-19, we had these problems. No, because of COVID-19 pandemic policies, we had these problems. Because the virus didn't cause the shutdown of supply chains. It was the policies that did. The trust and the tendency to need other people was replaced by fear of other people. You might have this dangerous pathogen. Exacerbated social divisions and tribal politics is one of the outcomes, particularly in the U.S., but what we're seeing is happening in much of Europe as well. So we've always had political division, but they weren't as acrimonious, they weren't as hostile, they weren't as really driven by almost hatred. Fear and paranoia leads to distrust and division, and that is the basis of fear. And so what we found, that hatred and fear allows people to, like I say, perhaps accept atrocities. In Canada, there were these truck drivers that were protesting against government policies, and they were vilified. They were made out to be these dangerous people who should be put in prison and use violence against them. The police, it was okay for the police to beat them. People applauded it instead of saying, do we want our government to attack our citizens because they have dissent over a political issue? So what we have now is expanded political power. We willingly, many sectors of society willingly gave permission for governments to expand political power. And there's a ratchet effect. Robert Higgs wrote about this, where when political power is granted to government, it's very hard to take it back. It goes up more easily than it comes down. But you expect governments to give you a reason why they engage in these policies. This was missing. Virtually no government that I know of, you could correct me, but no government do I know of that said we were supposedly saving lives by all of these policies, but they didn't look at the costs of saving those lives. Politicians underestimate costs because they want to be, again, granted that power to be able to conduct the policies they wish. This is really bizarre. How is it that science of decades was overturned in 24 hours? There had to be a motivation behind it, right?
This was one part of the new normal, is the new normal that our labor markets are totally disrupted, and that, you know, the new normal is 30 hours per week working and just more life work balance. Is this a new normal? Is the new normal, and I'm showing you some things by Larry Summers, the new food prices that are high or skyrocketing, or is inflation the new normal? Is what Chris just presented to you, you know, the fear, the new normal? Well, I hope none of this is the new normal. We believe, as Austrian economists, we believe in innovation, we believe in new technologies, we believe in advancement. But all this needs self-responsibility, competition, and the achievement principle. And without that, we will lose. Because if we look critically at Europe, where are we standing now? Europe has outsourced its security to the US. So those guys here take care of that. Do you trust them? We have outsourced our energy supply to Russia, and also very critically to new technologies that are supposed to be already on the market when we decided that the Green Deal is overdue. So this is also a very critical situation. And lastly, we have outsourced the production of our cheap industry production to China. So what is left for you, for the next generation? What is left for you? Your brains, exactly. Research those centralized planning issues. No, we are definitely on this road if you don't step up and ask those critical questions that need to be asked. Because there is nothing can be taken for granted. Nothing. And please challenge us. What we know is that there will be a loss of prosperity. There will be a loss. We have to cut certain things. We are spoiled, again, by taking certain things for granted. But everything has a price. Everything that we use from government, that we receive from government, has a price tag on it. It's just hidden because we don't know it yet. But the central banks should worry. Our mandate is price stability and financial market stability. Have we fulfilled that mandate in the past? Well, looking at us very critically, I would say we would not have those inflation rates if we had fulfilled our mandate, if we had done our job rightly, if we had not put those QE programs after the first financial crisis in 2008. What is the reason for inflation? The first is the expansion of the base of money, M1, M3, etc. It's the second reason. We have a couple of external reasons here these days why inflation rose. The second was the commodity prices rose due also to Green Deal and the green politics, because we need to transfer our industry, but it takes time. The time gap, the time lag was not priced in. Industries need time to innovate and to put the new product on the market. And that was not priced in. So all of a sudden energy prices rose, surprise, surprise. And this was already in 2018. We of course see different regional differences in inflation. This is the issue right now that we face in Europe, from inflation rates to above 20% to down to 4%. You are kind of more or less in the upper level, but still right now Europe is about, the Eurozone is about 7%. We Austrians are also bad on that front. We're almost to 9%. But there is one thing that we need to look at, and this is why everything that the gentleman will tell you matters a lot: public spending. So it's not the money doesn't come from out of thin air. No way. And it doesn't come out of the copy machine. It comes out of the printer, that's true. But eventually there should be a value underlying. And trust and value are the most important things in the financial system. We've seen a couple of problems on the financial markets coming up over the past years. We have kind of taken it careful. The ECB has done insofar a good job as they have looked into the capitalization of our European banks, and the capitalization of European banks in general is much better than that of the American banks. So the first problem was SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. And again, looking back at 2008, this was a crisis of the mortgages. It's a total different issue than what we have seen now. This is a crisis, or actually it's the interest rates. The rise of the interest rates has not been priced in by certain institutions. And if I am on the financial market, if I'm operating on the financial markets, I need to have a look at the interest rates, because we knew that eventually the central banks will have to react and will have to rise interest rates. We have the new normal is not low interest. The new normal is not low interest rates. So if the price of the money is zero or below zero, what happens? It doesn't have any value. So you have to rise it eventually, and in order to have those the inflation at bay, you need to have it in a stable level. But unfortunately, we in the Eurozone, and we're too slow to catch up on that. The Fed is 1 year ahead of us with regards to rising the interest rates, and in general with monetary policy. So we have to catch up on that. So let's look at what is the task of the banks. One is provision of liquidity and loans. This is one thing, and the other thing is, of course, taking bets on the markets. And if those things don't work together, we have an issue like that, like the Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank. However, both banks had different reasons to be bailed out. We are now slowly reducing the balance sheets to go back to normalization of monetary policy, but it will take a while until we have caught up. And then we do not know if there is another external shock that probably needs intervention again. So it's a vicious circle. And in order to leave this vicious circle, we should look at the Austrian School of Economics. We should study the boom and bust cycles that Hayek and Mises have researched in the 1920s. So more than 100 years ago, we have actually had this situation that we see these days with high inflation rates and disruption of the economies. We've seen that already once or twice. And the question is, how do we learn? Big governments are bad because they create big problems. Big governments in terms of big administration and big central planning. And no decisions are being made. And we need to make sure that those views the price system is at bay, entrepreneurship, individual choice, private property, and free and competitive markets. Those are the solutions to the problems, and not what has been discussed before. And after all, since we are here and we are discussing borders, and I believe in Europe, where European competition is in order, and where we have our borders, outside borders, that we defend them. But within, I think Europe has always been most successful when our economic entities were bigger than the political ones. So in other words, competition is, I think, our solution. Whatever you do, value and trust are the precondition. And if it's a digital currency, if it's a modern technology, blockchain technology, cryptocurrency, whatever, you feel free. I personally am a big fan of cash. It's a political wish by some people that they think they can reach out into our pockets directly. But the business case has actually not been made, at least not as far advanced that we can put it into reality tomorrow. It will take additional time. I rather prefer currencies that are competing, whether it's a euro with a dollar or you name it. But this is always better for our economies than just one-size-fits-all solutions. This is true for taxes, this is true for currencies, this is true for healthcare, this is true for pensions. No such thing as one-size-fits-all. We are diverse. We need this diversity in our currencies as well. And I think there should be a strict line between monetary policy and fiscal policy, which means a strict line between political intervention into our central banks, because they need to be independent. They should do their research, and we have long seen inflation coming. We have always warned, but there were certain people who did not want to hear it because it was easier for them to support Italy and France. And this is a political decision. It was not an expert decision, and this is the danger. So you have to depoliticize central banks totally if you keep them, as an Austrian economist, but as a central banker. So what we have done and what we can be proud of, we at least pushed for rise of interest rates and the reduction and the stopping of the APP program and the PEP programs. But as again, it's a political majority where people think they need to bail out countries and support nations who just constantly produce debt on behalf of the rest of Europe or the Eurozone. So this is a humble but a humble answer, put it this way. Madame Lagarde came into office in 2018 following Draghi, who just started all these PEP programs. She continued his policies, but she was forced by, I would say, gentlemen of reason, who said, let's look at the inflation rates. How can we measure inflation? What models do we have? And this was prior to COVID. And she was open and said, yes, let's look into this. So the big economics department at the ECB started working on that. And then came COVID, and all was forgotten again. And then we just restarted everything again. So I think we are now back where we were in 2018, looking at models, looking at reason, how to explain, looking at measurements of inflation. And of course, there are some Austrian economists, or at least somebody who are leaning to the Austrian school at the central banks across Europe, who understand the problems and who are against this feeding of France and Italy and whoever, but mostly France these days.
Thank you very much for your time. It's a great honor for me to speak with you. And I would like to ask you, what is your opinion regarding Romania's solidarity policies in relation with Ukraine? Just to put this into context, so just an example is our agricultural field, precisely the wheat sector, which has deeply suffered because of the very low-priced Ukrainian imports. Do you think there is, and these imports were, of course, approved by the EU, do you think there is a way of regulating our market independently when there is a crisis?
Well, As we have already mentioned during the conference today, all those interventions do not help entirely. So interventions usually have negative consequences for one side or the other side. And as economists, we can explain that in a very nice way, but we can also say it very harshly. You know, we also have to look into how we can collaborate and cooperate. And this interventions into the markets usually don't work, and we should not do it. It would have been better if we had not done that.
And do you think it is EU's responsibility to be more flexible, or it is, in this example, Romania's the responsibility to be more strong and firm when negotiating with the EU?
I think Romania should be very strong and firm, and as a strong country and with strong people, if they negotiate with the EU. And of course, it's all our task to help our neighbors in Ukraine. This is one thing, but I think the government also should make sure that they are strong when negotiating things for the Romanians.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your great opinion about Romania. What do you think should the Romanian National Bank maybe learn from Austria in the matter of policies?
Well, the thing is, with the Austrian Central Bank, we are part of the Eurozone, and this is a little bit a different position. We are less independent than the National Bank of Romania. So I think it's collaboration and looking and exchanging ideas. We have experts on both sides. So Romanian National Bank has great experts, very good economists, as we have. And so I think the collaboration between the two of them would help everybody to make money sound and go back to normalization of monetary policy.
Yes, indeed. And in 2022, Romania has outdone Austria in economic growth. Our GDP growth rate is really high. We are in top 3. However, our specialists affirm that it's somehow an artificial growth, and it comes from consuming from. We have great deficit, big loans. Do you have any advices on this?
Well, the only thing that I would say to each and every European country is look at your productivity. Be more productive than the others. Look at competition. Be competitive. Don't overdo it with regulation. Don't overdo it with taxes. Make sure that there is individual and entrepreneurial freedom on that front, and by that you create growth and well-being for everybody.
Thank you. You're a great female libertarian, so I have this question. I can't keep it to myself. Do you have any thoughts on the Schengen case?
As I already mentioned, for me, it's very important that we stick to the 4 European freedoms and that we respect them. And this is, I think, the most important thing to do. And we have made many mistakes during COVID when we locked down and when we closed our borders. This is not the reason why we created the European Union and why we created the 4 European freedoms. So we need to be able to exchange goods, labor, and services freely, and I think this is the ultimate idea.
Yeah. Tonight was the free word was the great one, and you used it many times to be free people, free markets, and free people indeed.
Indeed, yes, you said it, because otherwise we will not create economic growth and well-being for anybody, and we want people to uprise and to elevate. And as you said, you outperformed us with economic growth last year because you were much better in managing certain things than we were.
We're talking about a specific type of income tax. We're going to talk about the flat tax. And I want to give some basic principles of tax policy that probably every single economist will agree with. Economists tend to agree on the direction of things. We don't necessarily agree on the magnitude of things. But in terms of the direction, it doesn't matter if you have some ultra left-wing economist. If I say that modest tax rates on productive behavior will lead to more economic activity, they'll agree. They might say it's only this much, I'll say it's this much. Also, every economist, I think, is going to agree that you don't want to have a tax bias against saving and investing. Now, the left-wing economists might say, well, it's okay to have capital gains taxes and death taxes and wealth taxes because the damage will only be this much, and maybe I'll say this much. And likewise, well, actually, I think almost all economists will actually agree not to have loopholes and exemptions and credits and exclusions and other sort of forms of industrial policy in the tax code. But then there's a bottom part that you probably won't see because you have that ugly guy's head in the way. You also want, if you want a good tax system, you have to have a modest-sized government. Now, the good news is, by European Union standards, Romania has a relatively small government. You're way over at the bottom end over there next to Ireland. So congratulations, you're not Denmark, you're not France, you're not Austria. Barbara, you are doing a very bad job. So by virtue of the fact that you have not allowed your burden of government to grow too big, you do have the flexibility in Romania to have a decent tax system. Fiscal policy is just one of many things, and of course tax policy is just one part of fiscal policy. As I already said, you have to pay attention to the size of government. So speaking specifically about tax policy, why do you want a low marginal tax rate? Because what I'm actually going to tell you today isn't necessarily that you have to have a flat tax, but you have to have low tax rates. I remember years ago being in Iceland. Iceland had a flat tax, but you know what? It had a rate of 37%. I don't want that flat tax. I'd rather have a so-called progressive tax with rates of 5 and 10% than a flat tax of 37%. But as a general rule, of course, flat taxes are associated with low tax rates. So you want to have a low tax rate because why? People have a greater incentive to be productive, to create jobs, to create wealth, to be entrepreneurial. And also, when your tax rate is low, guess what? People have less incentive to hide their income. They're not going to be in the black economy or the shadow economy, whatever you want to call it. Well, if your tax rate's 0, yes, I'm going to earn more money. If your tax rate is 20%, okay, why not? But if it's 50%, you say not today, and if it's 100%, you say no blankety blank way. You want tax rates to be low because you want people to be productive. It's that simple. Now, interestingly, politicians understand this when they want to. All the time in the United States, and I'm sure in Brussels and in Bucharest, you have politicians banging their fists saying, we need higher taxes on tobacco because we want people to smoke less. Well, I'm a libertarian. I don't think it's government's job to control our private lives, so I don't really like what they're saying, but economically they're correct. The higher the tax on tobacco, the less people will smoke. I mean, you'll also have an underground economy and stuff like that, but the economics of what they're saying is reasonably sound. My problem is those politicians don't apply that lesson equally. Because if a tax on cigarettes deters smoking, does a tax, you can't see it because of the chairs, but does a tax on earnings deter working? Of course it does. And again, even a left-wing economist will agree, we'll just disagree on the magnitude of how much work is being discouraged. But I also want to say it's not just a question of what your tax rate is, it's how many times that tax is being imposed. This is the issue of whether or not you tax income only one time. This is sort of the tax base issue. You have the tax rate, then you have the tax base. And sometimes the tax base is too narrow because there are exclusions and special preferences. Sometimes the tax base is too heavy because you're forcing a taxpayer to in effect pay more than one tax in the same level of income. Every single economic theory, even Marxism, even socialism, they all agree that you have to have capital formation in order to have growth. You have to set aside some of today's income to finance tomorrow's prosperity. But if you do that in the United States between the capital gains tax, the corporate income tax, the double tax on dividends, and the death tax, you can have that single dollar of income taxed as many as 4 different times. So even though your statutory tax rates might not be that high, by the time that income is getting taxed over and over again, the effective tax rate can be very high. And so in other words, what's happening with our tax code, and it's not just the US, many European countries also make this mistake, when you overtax saving and investing, you are in effect eating up the seed corn for your future economy. Imagine that your job is to have an apple orchard. It's a pretty simple business, right? You plant some trees, the trees grow up, the trees give you apples. Even a politician can understand that. So I tell the politician, okay, imagine you bought this apple orchard, you then bought the saplings, the little trees, you planted them, you fertilized them, you protected them from pests and things like that. And then finally, after years of having your money tied up, with the risk that you could lose it, because being an entrepreneur is always risky. Perry's going to talk about that. Finally, after all these years of having your money tied up in a risky investment, you have a crop of apples. Your apple trees have grown up. And I tell the politician, how do you harvest those apples? Do you pick them from the tree or do you chop down the tree? Because you know what? Even a politician will understand, well, maybe it's easier to harvest the apples if I chop down the tree, but then I won't have new apples next year. And I say, congratulations, politician. You now understand the apples are the income, the tree is the capital. Don't tax the capital. If you have to, tax the income. Preferably not. But if you have to tax something, tax the apples, do not tax the tree. In the United States, we technically don't chop down the tree, but we saw branches of the tree. And other countries do that as well. Why do we have 76,000 pages of tax law? Because politicians, in the 110 years since the income tax was created, politicians have created one special loophole, one special preference, one corrupt giveaway after another to reward their campaign contributors. That is not only economically wrong, because in effect you're bribing people to make decisions they wouldn't make if the taxes weren't there, but it's also very corrupt. It's a way of turning your tax code into something disgusting. Now, what happens if you have a low rate, you get rid of double taxation, and you get rid of all the complexity? What do you have? You have a flat tax. That's a good thing to have. Romania has that. Do not give it up. Do not let the politicians start down the path of dividing your population and trying to foment class warfare. Because I guarantee you one thing. The moment you give your politicians the power to tax one person at a higher rate, and of course they'll say, oh, we want to tax an oligarch or a rich person at a higher rate. But once they get the power to tax one person at a higher rate, it's just a matter of time before they tax everyone at a higher rate. That's what happened in the US. What the revenue maximizing point is, I want to be at the growth maximizing point. And what's that point? Where you raise just enough revenue to finance the few legitimate functions of government. Now, why am I bringing up the Laffer curve? Because I want to show you an example from the United States about why class warfare doesn't work. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was elected president, we had a top tax rate of 70%. That's stealing. I mean, that's not a tax rate, that's stealing. At that 70% tax rate, and by the way, these are all numbers from our tax police, the IRS. They put out something every year called the Statistics of Income Bulletin. And in 1980, we had 117,000 rich people about. They reported $36 billion of income to the IRS, and the government got $19 billion of revenue from these rich people, defined as $200,000 a year or above, the ones affected by the high tax rate. 70% tax rate, $19 billion in tax revenue. Reagan took that 70% tax rate and lowered it all the way down to 28%. And my left-wing friend said, that's not fair. The rich won't pay enough. The Treasury will be starved of revenue. If you go to the IRS 1988 Statistics of Income Bulletin, guess how much money people making more than $200,000 a year paid? Did it fall proportionally to about $8.5 billion? Did it maybe fall, but not quite, maybe to 15 billion instead of 19 billion? Did they actually pay the same amount at a lower rate, or did revenues go up? And what happened to revenue in the 1980s? It went up. He's right. How much did revenue go up? $99 billion of revenue. 5 times as much revenue from those making more than $200,000 a year. By the way, Joe Biden wants to reverse this. And guess what? He's going to reverse the numbers as well. When you try to tax the rich with class warfare, guess what? Rich people aren't stupid, or maybe they're stupid, but they don't have stupid tax advisors. So they won't work as much, they won't save as much, they won't invest as much, they won't be as entrepreneurial. The moment you abandon, in the framing of such taxes, the cardinal principle of exacting from all individuals the same proportion of their income or their property, you are at sea without rudder or compass, and there is no amount of injustice or folly you may not commit. Again, that's simply a more eloquent way of saying what I said before. You give the politicians the power to tax one person at a higher rate, they're going to tax all of you at a higher rate. Try to measure those 5 categories I looked at: monetary, trade, regulatory, fiscal, so on and so forth. And what you will see is that the US actually scores below a lot of European countries. We are not a laissez-faire paradise. And specifically, since you mentioned the issue of healthcare, we have one of the most government-controlled, government-centric healthcare systems in the world. Only about 10% of healthcare in America is paid directly by consumers to providers, which is how a free market works. The vast majority of healthcare expenditures in the US are paid for by what's called a third party. 50% of healthcare expenditures are directly paid for by government. Medicare, Medicaid, VA health, things like that. And the so-called private portion of our healthcare system is the result of a tax code exclusion where if you get income, if you get compensation in the form of a health benefit in the US, it's not taxed.
So experts suggest that politicians want progressive taxing because of the exponential growth in the state budget, in contrast with the flat taxation, which brings linear growth in the state budget. So do you think is the flat tax more citizen-friendly, and is this discussion a way of bribing votes because we are ahead of election campaign?
The flat tax protects the ordinary Romanian citizen because government doesn't get a chance to get the big win when someone's income goes up. Yes, maybe the government gets 10% more when you get a pay raise, but they don't get 20% more or 30% more. So the flat tax is pro-citizen, the progressive tax is pro-politician.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. And another argument pro-progressive taxing is the fact that we naturally need to pay bigger taxes to the state in order to benefit from better public services. Although you think, but why do you think we need a low flat tax?
The question is, how big should government be? The really fast-growing economies of the world, the Asian tiger economies like Singapore and Taiwan, they have very small government. The U.S. grows faster than France. We have smaller government in the U.S. Switzerland grows faster than Germany. Switzerland has smaller government than Germany.
And citizens, do they pay bigger taxes to the state?
When there are lower taxes, you get faster growth. You don't need to finance a big government. A big government is bad because it will slow down the growth. So a flat tax is good because it leaves more money in the pockets of the people who earn it. And a flat tax is good in that it puts handcuffs on politicians so that it's harder for them to expand the burden of government spending.
So you stand by the affirmation, big governments, big problems, big money, big sums of money.
If you look at around Europe, the evidence is that the high-tax, big government countries, Greece, Italy, France, they grow slower. You want to be more like Switzerland, low government, or at least modest-sized government, lower tax rates, more freedom, and politicians behaving better.
Regulations always say you're not allowed to do this, or if they're really nasty, it says that you're not allowed to do anything but this. Those are the only kinds of regulations. That's what they do. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that they're really limiting what entrepreneurs can do. What can entrepreneurs envision? What can they imagine to produce for other people? Well, if there's a regulation in place, that means you can imagine and fantasize all you want, but you can't do this over here, because that's regulated. And this over here? No, not that either. And if you want to do it here, well, you have to do it this way. Well, that means a politician is telling entrepreneurs, if you want to think in new ways about this, you have to think in new ways in this way. But obviously, we're leaving a lot of value on the table, right? What we're really doing is replacing the consumer and the consumer's choice with a public choice, a public good. The politicians decide what should be, not consumers. Entrepreneurs can't choose to serve consumers in the best way possible. They will not and cannot pursue those goods and services that people would probably value more. So they will choose something that they already believe is of lesser value, which means we're going to have less economic growth, which means we're going to have less entrepreneurship. So instead of an economy going like this, it's going to go like this. That's the problem here, right? And think of this. The iPhone, it wasn't new. It wasn't completely novel. It was built off of other innovations. Well, imagine if you then stop entrepreneurship by curtailing it with regulations. Well, that means that you won't have those new gadgets and new products that other entrepreneurs will build off of, which means you won't have the next generation and the next generation and this other new thing that new entrepreneurs in the future will build off of. Well, that means instead of this trajectory, we're not going to have this, but we're going to have this trajectory. We're going to lose out a lot. So the true cost of regulations then is not really just the now, the present, what we get or what we don't get right now. It is really what is unrealized. All those innovations that don't come to be, all those products and services that we can't choose from, that consumers can't choose from. This is really cutting wealth for consumers, for all of us. We're all consumers.